Now, our next speaker is Dr. Tomer Persico, lecturer and researcher in religious studies with a special focus on New Age and Judaism. And his talk will be the end point of Zionism, Ethnocentrism, and the Temple Mount.
Yes, thank you very much. And first of all, I have to say that I'm humbled to be here. There are people sitting here that I've, of course, learned from them, even on this subject specifically, so thank you for inviting me. This is what I will talk about, and I will begin with this. There is one overriding question that accompanies the Zionist project, wrote Gershon Sholem. Whether or not Jewish history will be able to endure this entry into the concrete realm without perishing in the crisis of the messianic claim, which has virtually been conjured up from its depth. The entry into history to which Sholem refers to is the establishment of the State of Israel and the ingathering of the Jews from diaspora, both echoing and for some indeed realizing the ancient Jewish messianic myth of the return to Zion. However, when Sholem wrote these words in 1971 essay Towards an Understanding of the Messianic Idea in Judaism, the matter at hand was the dramatic significance of Israel's great victory in the Six-Day War 4 years earlier. It was a time of great euphoria, as sweeping as it was blinding. Yeshayahu Leibovich, the religiously observant public intellectual, warned the country's leaders against the dangerous ruling by force a population of over 1 million Palestinians. Sholem, though, was perhaps hinting at his concern with the physical return to the ancient sites of religious significance. It was the sudden availability of Judea and Samaria, the original Bible Belt, that would position the secular Zionist movement in direct confrontation with its intrinsic logical end, the actual possibility of a complete return to Judaism's mythical past. Possibly, as a scholar of Kabbalah, Sholem had a better grasp than Leibovich of the Messianic eros and of Zionism's susceptibility to its lure. From its inception, the Zionist movement spoke in two voices, one pragmatic, seeking a haven for millions of persecuted Jews, the other prophetic, attributing redemption significance to the establishment of a sovereign state. Against the background of surging anti-Semitism at the end of the 19th century, many Jews discarded the message of emancipation in favor of an effort to create a national home for the Jewish people. Whereas the shapers of Western culture, from Kant to Marx, perceived individual liberation in an egalitarian regime as the proper secularization of religious salvation, for the Jewish collectivity this turned out to be a false hope, and ethnic nationalism was turned to as the best resolution. This solution, however, bore messianic implications, for it is precisely the founding of an independent Jewish kingdom that is a salient sign of the Jewish redemption. The Christians received their deliverance, and the Jews, including those who would rather leave religion in the Museum of History, will receive theirs. Well aware of the messianic implications of their efforts, the shapers of the Zionist movement tried to neutralize them from the outset. In his Hebrew language book Zion in Zionism, the historian Moti Golani reveals the ambivalent attitude towards Jerusalem harbored by Zionist leaders. Theodor Herzl himself, the founder of modern political Zionism, was not convinced that the establishment of a Jewish political entity in Palestine would best be served by Jerusalem designation as its capital. Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, maintained that if the holy places were under Israeli sovereignty, Zionism would be colored by religion and would not be able to design its capital according to its progressive worldview. Years later, in the Six-Day War, Defense Minister Moshe Dayan hesitated at length before ordering the capture of the Temple Mount. "What do I need all this Vatican for?" he famously said, expressing the classic Zionist approach to the subject. Nevertheless, from the beginning there were also voices that demanded not only sovereignty over all Jerusalem, but also the completion of the redemptive process by force of arms. Before Israel's establishment, such calls emanated from the fascist wing of the Zionist movement, fascism then not yet a profanity but a legitimate ideology. In the 1930s, figures like the journalist Abba Achimeir and the poet Uri Tzvi Greenberg, the founders of Brit HaBiryonim movement, staged demonstrations in which the shofar was blown at the Wailing Wall at the end of every Yom Kippur, just as it is in the synagogue. a custom that was later continued by the Irgun underground militia led by Menachem Begin. In the Principles, a concise manifesto which Avraham Yair Stern wrote as a constitution for the Lehi, a pre-state underground organization he headed, he set forth 18 points that in his view would be essential for the Jewish people's national revival. The 18th and final principle calls for the building of the Third Temple as the symbol of the era of full redemption. Now, a point worth noting is that these modern enthusiasts of the temple were not themselves religiously observant, at least not in Orthodox terms. They aspired not to a religious revival, but to a national one, and Jewish mythical sources fueled their passion for political independence. For them, the temple was an axis and a focal point around which the people must unite. In a certain sense, they simply took secular Zionism to its logical conclusion, and in doing so, turned it topsy-turvy. As noted above, Jewish redemption is classically founded on the renewed Jewish sovereignty in the Holy Land. According to the tradition, one measure of this sovereignty is the establishment of a temple and a monarchical government descendant from the house of David. Zionism wanted to make do with political independence in Israel, but to stop midpoint on the route to a monarch and a temple. But the midpoint en route to the monarch and a temple is largely arbitrary, based as it is on pragmatic logic and liberal humanist values. For those who don't believe in realpolitik and are not humanists, the push toward the end of times is perfectly logical. The end of times, though, is the point at which hyper-Zionism becomes post-Zionism. As Baruch Falach shows in his doctoral thesis written in 2010 Bar-Ilan University, one ideological messianic line connects Achimeir, Greenberg, and Stern to Shabtai Ben-Dov and the Jewish underground organization of the early 1980s, which, among other things, wanted to blow up the Dome of the Rock. In the figure of Ben-Dov, a formerly secular Lehi underground man who became a highly original and radical religious Zionist thinker, the torch passes from messianic seculars to the religiously observant. It was Ben-Dov, turning from secularism to Jewish orthodoxy himself, as noted, who ordered Yehuda Etzion, a member of the 1980s Jewish underground, to blow up the third holiest site in Islam, in order to force God to bring redemption. If you want to do something that will solve all the problems of the people of Israel, he told him, do this. And Etzion duly set about planning the deed. Now, this apocalyptic messianism differs from the messianism of Gush Emunim, the bloc of the faithful, the progenitors of the settler movement, as conceived by Rabbi Abraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, who died in 1935. Gush Emunim, loyal to the teaching of Rabbi Kook and his son, mostly, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, developed a mamlachti, statist approach, according to which, even though its activists alone understand the political reality and its reflection in the upper worlds, it is not for them to impose on the nation of Israel measures that the nation is not ready for. As settler activist Ze'ev Hever put it after the underground was exposed, again, beginning of the 80s, we are allowed to pull the nation of Israel after us as long as we are only 2 steps ahead of it, no more than that. Accordingly, in political terms, the settlement project in Judea and Samaria can be considered pioneering, but not revolutionary. And indeed, we must remember that the settlement enterprise had in its inception the support of large sections of the labor movement, as well as iconic cultural figures such as the poet Natan Alterman and the composer-songwriter Naomi Shemer. This was not the case with temple matters, which are far more remote from the heart of the public. In addition, Kook-style messianism shunned the Temple Mount for halachic Jewish legal reasons. Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, like his father, ruled that it is forbidden to visit the Mount. As we all know, what is sacred is often defined as that which is forbidden. And what can be more sacred than the Temple Mount? Here too, Ben-Dov and Etzion followed a radically different path. Furthermore, before 1967 and afterward, all the leading poskim, the rabbis who issue halachic rulings, both ultra-Orthodox and from the religious Zionist movement, decreed that it is forbidden to visit the Temple Mount. This was reiterated by all great rabbinic figures of recent generations: Rabbis Yosef Shalom Eliashiv, Ovadia Yosef, Mordechai Eliyahu, Eliyahu Bakshi Doron, Moshe Amar, Avraham Shapira, Tzvi Tau, and others. The ideas of the 1980s Jewish underground were extreme then, not only in terms of the violence they manifested, but in their concrete interest in the Temple Mount. Such a relation with Judaism's most holy site was virtually unheard of at that time, especially among the religious observant. No longer. If in the past, yearning for the Temple Mount was the obsession of a marginalized, ostracized, sometimes violent minority within the religious Zionist public, today it has become one of the most significant voices within that community. In a survey conducted in May 2014 among the religious Zionist public, 75.4% said they favored the ascent of Jews to the Temple Mount, compared to only 24.6% against. In addition, 19.6% said they had already visited the site, and 35.7% said that they had not yet gone there but intended a visit. These outstanding figures, along with the growing number of actual visits to the Mount by religious Zionist public, signify not only a turning point from the state-oriented approach of Rabbi Kook, but also an active rebellion against the tradition of halakha. We are witnessing a tremendous transformation among sections of this public. Before our very eyes, they are becoming post-Cookist and perhaps even post-Orthodox. Ethnic nationalism is supplementing, not only mamlachtiyut, statist consciousness, but faithfulness to the halakha. Their identity is now based more on mythic ethnocentrism than on Torah study, and the Temple Mount serves them, just as it served the secular Yair Stern and Uri Tzvi Greenberg before them, as an exalted totem embodying the essence of sovereignty over the land of Israel. Thus, in the same survey, the group identifying with classic religious Zionism was asked, what are the reasons on which to base oneself when it comes to Jews going up the Temple Mount? Fully 96.8% replied that visiting the site would constitute, quote, a contribution to strengthening Israeli sovereignty in the holy place. Only 54.4% saw that a visit should be made in order to carry out, quote, a positive commandment, mitzvat aseh, and prayer at the site. Patently, for the religious Zionists who took part in the survey, the national rationale was far more important than the halachic grounds. Ethnocentric consciousness is replacing halachic sensibility. How did the religious Zionist public undergo such a radical theological transformation? A hint is discernible at the point when the first significant halachic ruling was issued allowing visits to the Temple Mount. This occurred at the beginning of 1996, when the Yesha Rabbinical Council, Yesha, an acronym for Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, published an official dispatch containing a ruling that visit to the Temple Mount was permissible, accompanied by a call to every rabbi to ascend the site himself and guide his congregation on how to make the ascent according to all restrictions of the halakha. Moti Inbari, in his book Jewish Fundamentalism in the Temple Mount, draws a connection between the weakening of the Gush Emunim Messianic paradigm, which was profoundly challenged by the Oslo peace process between Israel and Palestinians, and the surge of interest in the Mount. According to Leon Festinger's well-known "When Prophecy Fails" research model, disappointment stemming from difficulties on the road toward the realization of a messianic vision leads not to disillusionment, but to radicalization of belief, within the framework of which an attempt is made to foist the redemptive trust on the reluctant reality. The temple functions here as a shortcut to salvation and replaces settlements on the soil of the land of Israel as the key to redemption. An intensification of this process came with the final crushing blow to the Cook-based messianic model delivered by the State of Israel's withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005 and the destruction of the Gush Katif settlements there. The Gush Emunim narrative, which talked about an unbroken redemption and the impossibility of retreat on the process, encountered an existential crisis, as did the perception of the secular state as the Messiah's donkey as it is called, a reference to the parable about the manner in which the Messiah will make his appearance, meaning that a full progress towards redemption can be made on the state's secular, dumb, material back. Many religious Zionists are thus turning towards the Mount in place of the belief in a step-by-step progress to salvation. The Temple Mount advocates are already now positing the final goal, and by visiting the site and praying there, they are deviating from both halachic tradition and from Israeli law. Statist consciousness is abandoned, along with the patience needed for graduated process towards redemption. In their place come partisan messianicism and irreverent efforts to hasten the messianic era. What is perhaps most interesting in the political support is the political support they are receiving. Just as was the case with the pre-state period, secular Jews are again joining and in some cases leading the movement towards the Temple Mount. Almost half of the Likud party's MPs, some of them secular, are active in promoting Jewish visits there. Already in 2012, Yuli Edelstein, up to a few days ago the Speaker of the Knesset, our parliament, stated that my job is to deal with the daily process connecting and building the people of Israel which leads to the temple. Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs Ze'ev Elkin explained that it is important to remove the Temple Mount, from the domain of the wild-eyed religious. We must explain to broad swaths of the public that without this place our national liberty is incomplete. It was only this past February that Coalition Chair Yariv Levin waxed poetic regarding the importance of the mountain at the center of Jerusalem. No living organism can function without a heart. It seems to me that when the Jews for so many years sat in exile and prayed for their return to Zion, they did not mean Tel Aviv, but Jerusalem. They did not dream of returning to the Knesset building and the Prime Minister's office, but to someplace else, to the Temple Mount. And Likud party members show their love with more than words. MK Miri Regev, who chaired the Knesset's Interior and Environment Committee, had in the last 2 years convened no less than 15 meetings of the committee to deliberate on the subject, the Temple Mount and Jews ascending it and praying there. As one report had stated, that's more than all the meetings devoted to the subject by the committee from 1967 until then. Nota bene, this is not about untrammeled longing for the burning of sacrifices. It is neither the observation of biblical commandment nor the upholding of the halachic law that matter to these Knesset members, even the religious ones among them. The Temple Mount serves Regev, Edelstein, and Elkin as a national flag around which to rally. The location of the temple to them is nothing more than a capstone in the national struggle against the Palestinians, and the sovereignty over the mountain becomes a totem embodying in its commanding figure the sovereignty over the entire country. This is why Elkin speaks of our national liberty, and this is why Tzipi Chotobeli, another MP from the Likud, said on another occasion that the construction of the temple in its place on the Temple Mount should symbolize the renewal of the sovereignty of the people of Israel in its land. Look, the construction of the temple. Obviously, we are witnessing here a unique amalgamation of religion and nationalism, trusting the former not only into the public sphere, but to the very epicenter of a religio-national conflict between Judaism and Islam, Israel and Palestine. What is interesting is not only the cooperation between the religious Zionist activists for the temple and the right-wing politicians seeking to enforce the state sovereignty over more and more territory, but the diffusive and intermixed character of each side's ideological stance. While from the ranks of the religious Zionist public comes the demand to impose the secular state's rule on Judaism's most holy site, from the politician side comes religious language styled with romantic schmaltz. And while the believers of Messianic vision includes the final transformation of the state into a theocracy ruled by a king and a Sanhedrin located within the very temple they want to raise, thus making the current democratic parliament redundant, the members of that same parliament have no real interest in the traditional Jewish law and couldn't care less if their use of the holy site is in contradiction to the purity and defilement clauses within it. What leads them is a tenacious ethnocentric sentiment. And yet, both sides have grounds to forward their vision. Because, as mentioned earlier, Judaism's messianic vision is indeed based on the forming of a state, a kingdom, and a special nation that inhabits it. Being an ethnic religion, and more precisely a unified socio-cultural system based on a covenant of laws made exclusively between the Jewish people and the divine being which is considered to be the only God, Judaism challenges the primary dichotomy between the sacrificial cultic and the political spheres that is almost taken for granted within the Christian world. The return of the Jewish people to their promised land and their successful, at least to date, bid at political autonomy thus fundamentally disputes the principles on which the modern process of secularism is based. Indeed, perhaps the greatest claim the current infatuation with the Temple Mount has against secularism is its defiance of the very basic process of differentiation, being the essential framework underlying the secularization process. Looking as far back as Henri Saint-Simon, we find the importance of the differentiation of the social spheres as the intrinsic and indispensable juncture on the path to modern society. From the ancient Roman world through the Christian medieval and to the modern West, religion has passed from being deeply intertwined with, indeed encompassing all circles and scopes of life, to sharing split domination with the political, temporal powers, and finally to becoming just another social sphere on par among many others. What temple enthusiasts envision is a complete reversal of this process, joining in holy matrimony the political and the religious, which for some national religious Jews need never have been divided in the first place. It is this aim which makes them what might be called second-order fundamentalists. If we allow ourselves to use the phrase fundamentalism to refer to extreme part of Jewish orthodoxy and dub Haredi, ultra-orthodox, as Jewish fundamentalism, desiring to save what they believe is a life lived in authentic obedience to the ancient divine law, we may say that temple enthusiasts wishing to lead Judaism to fundamentals that are pre-halachic, indeed pre-Talmudic and pre-rabbinic, are fundamentalists of a deeper second order. They want even more fundamental fundamentals. Indeed, rabbinic fundamentalism, inside rabbinic fundamentalism, they are promoting priestly fundamentalism. As noted, this second-order Jewish fundamentalism is closely bound to Jewish nationalism. First, in the very simple sense, the yearning for the Temple Mount and the Great Temple is the result of the concrete possibility of reaching it. Technically, that is, it is contingent on the state of Israel's establishment in the land of Israel and on the military conquest of Jerusalem. Secondly, and more important, the aspiration to build a temple is related to the desire, which also has become a realistic possibility only upon the modern ingathering of the exiles and Israel's creation, to unite the whole Jewish people under one national religious leadership. While during the ancient temple's time, and of course during the diaspora, the Jewish people were never united, never committed to the same place or form of worship, the imagined community of the modern national state ironically makes this presumably possible. Ultimately, however, the yearning for the Temple Mount and the temple is intertwined with Jewish nationalism because it is the end point of Zionism, the point at which Zionism itself self-destructs. As stated earlier, Zionism, which proposed the secularization of Judaism and its conversion from religion to nationality, set itself on the ancient messianic rails, whose first station is the ingathering of exiles and the next, the rebuilding of the Israelite kingdom. The messianic course, however, has as yet unrealized depots, temple and king. Arriving at these will immediately turn the secularizing rationale of the Jewish national movement on its head and at once position it as the realization of the tradition's most explicit religious and messianic yearnings. For religious scholars such as ourselves, however, the secular religious spectrum within Zionism is interesting not as a political development, but as a challenge to the secularization thesis, which is with its possible annulling of the differentiation between the religious and the secular spheres. The rising wave of ethnocentrism, which is at this time sweeping the Israeli society, poses a great test for the secular Israeli democracy. Mythical currents are ascending from the depths of history and the collective memory, carrying with them the demand to realize what for traditional Judaism was the obvious, a political theology in its most unmetaphorical meaning. It is the response to this summoning which will determine the answer to Gershom Scholem's salient question, whether or not Jewish history will be able to endure its entry into the concrete realm without succumbing to the messianic claim that has been conjured up from its depth. Thank you.